100 polling stations opening now across Israel as the around 116,000 members of the Likud party vote to select their leader. Little chance that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will not win, but for the first time in years, a real challenge to his leadership from within. I'll talk to our correspondent Iris Makler. She'll join us from Jerusalem shortly. Dozens of soldiers and jihadists killed amid a wave of attacks in the West African nation of Burkina Faso. That after 35 civilians, mostly women, were killed there earlier in the week. And no let up in the violence in Hong Kong. Even on Christmas Day, the police using tear gas as they battled with pro-democracy demonstrators. Good to have you with us. I'm Stuart Norval here on France 24. Whatever the result, Benjamin Netanyahu can only lose. That's the view of one leading Israeli pollster as the Likud party today holds a leadership contest. The pollster saying no matter how much support his rival Gideon Saar receives, it will be the first time in 10 years that a group of voters on the right explicitly expresses their desire to get rid of Netanyahu. Little doubt then that Netanyahu, who's led, of course, Israel for over a decade, will win. But if Saar manages to make that result close, the Israeli Prime Minister inevitably weakened. Well, we're going to cross to Jerusalem, speak to our correspondent there, Iris Makler. Iris, the polls opening now there. Rather a worry there, particular worry, really. This is about the weather, isn't it?
Yes, there's a political storm and a real storm, and the real storm, of course, affects voters. There's snow in the north, there's rain and winds. They were actually even considering changing the day, but they haven't. They've extended the polling hours, so we won't know the result tonight as we thought we would. We'll only know tomorrow morning. They can vote till midnight, I believe. And this weather does affect Gideon Saar, the challenger, more than Netanyahu. Netanyahu's voters are the people who support him. The real supporters will come out in any weather, rusted on Netanyahu supporters. But nevertheless, Netanyahu has been worried. He's been doing 6 or 7 appearances a day. And, you know, he's giving it his all, even though he opposed it in the beginning.
So, Iris, what are the indications then for this vote there?
The indications are that Netanyahu will win. The only question is by how much. The Likud party traditionally doesn't like to change leaders midstream, to challenge its leaders. And so the feeling is that he will pull through. However, there is some support for the challenger. Even the fact of the challenge is so extraordinary in Likud terms and actually in Israeli terms, where Netanyahu is portraying himself as the essential leader, the man without whom Israel can't survive. And that's true of Israel. And he says the Likud, you know, vote for me for the Likud. He says vote for me for Israel. And that's very effective. He's a very compelling candidate. He's a great campaigner. Gideon Saar less charismatic, and so the feeling is that Netanyahu will win this internal election, but may not. Nevertheless, there's no indication that that will affect the larger national election in less than 2 months' time now.
And finally, Iris, there was actually some dramas there last night there as well on the eve of the poll, wasn't there?
There was. Netanyahu was attending one of these campaign rallies in Ashkelon, a town in the south, and a rocket came and he had to be taken off the stage. That echoes something that happened during the last election, I believe the second. There have been so many. And what happened then was it looked bad. The optics were bad for Netanyahu. He was taken off the stage and the people had to scramble to find somewhere wherever they could because there wasn't somewhere they could go that was safe. So this time he came back after the rocket was intercepted by the Iron Dome anti-missile system, and he said whoever fired that rocket, let him pack his bag. And indeed there was an attack on Gaza that followed that attack, that sole rocket that was intercepted. There might not have been an attack usually, by the way, if there was only one rocket and it was intercepted.
Iris, thanks very much. Iris Makler, correspondent, joining us there from Jerusalem. Now, 35 civilians, mostly women, and dozens of soldiers left dead. That in Burkina Faso, left in mourning after a wave there of jihadist attacks. Security sources saying around a dozen soldiers killed in the latest attack overnight in Halele, in the volatile northern province of Soum. 7 soldiers also dying in simultaneous attacks on the northern town of Arbinda, and a military base which lasted several hours and were of a rare intensity, according to the army. 80 assailants also killed. Jean-Emile Jimmy reports.
The seized motorbikes of dead insurgents litter a military post in the northern province of Soum, Burkina Faso. The ghostly reminder of the fatalities continuing to pile up in the region. Around a dozen more soldiers were reportedly killed on Wednesday after a military patrol was ambushed overnight in Halele, located in the same area. The attack came just 5 hours after a separate insurgency killed 35 civilians, mostly female, at a military outpost in Arbinda, with 80 militants and 7 soldiers adding to the deaths caused by the latest clashes. The Ministry of Defense is now calling for a united front against the Islamist militants behind the attacks.
The
military is sending a strong message. They're saying that if you go back to Ouagadougou, tell civilians that we're together, and it's together that we'll win this battle.
The incidents follow on from a year of turbulence, which has seen a spillover of attacks from the surrounding region.
Until recently, Mali was the country in the Sahel region with the worst hit violence. It was really known to have the most attacks. Burkina Faso has overtaken it. And just in the first half of 2019, you had more people killed in extremist violence in Burkina Faso than in all of 2018.
Attacks over the past year have killed hundreds and forced nearly 1 million people from their homes.
Now, no Christmas let up in the violence in Hong Kong. After the violence on Christmas Eve there, even Christmas Day itself seeing sporadic clashes between police and pro-democracy activists, as the city's pro-Beijing leader said the festive season was being ruined by demonstrators. Police using pepper spray and tear gas as activists held small flash mob protests in shopping malls across the city. Catherine Bennett reports.
Clashes between Hong Kong police and protesters continued on Christmas Day. Activists held flash mob protests across the city. In the district of Mong Kok, police fired rounds of tear gas. Protesters have been targeting shopping centres in particular to cause economic disruption. Against a backdrop of Christmas decorations, police used pepper spray in an attempt to disperse crowds. Hong Kong's leader, Carrie Lam, said in a Facebook post that demonstrators had ruined Christmas Eve festivities on Tuesday. But protesters blame authorities.
I think it was the police that ruined the festive atmosphere by firing tear gas. Maybe they thought some smoke would make people happier, but I can't agree. Christmas should be a day when everyone is happy. Why did they have to look for people? They shouldn't. Everyone should be celebrating.
There is broad support for the pro-democracy movement. This restaurant is handing out free meals to protesters. Customers leave messages of support for those demonstrating and even donate cash to the movement. The protest started more than 6 months ago against an extradition bill that has since been withdrawn. The protests have since evolved into a larger revolt, resisting increased meddling by Beijing in Hong Kong's political freedoms.
Let's have a look at some other world news on the programme. And at least 16 people have been killed in the Philippines as a typhoon roared ashore there on Christmas Day. 6 other people still missing as the typhoon leapt from one island to another, crumpling houses, toppling trees and blacking out towns and cities. Tens of thousands of people left stranded, many of them staying at evacuation centres. The typhoon weaker, but following a similar path to Super Typhoon Haiyan that killed over 7,000 people in 2013. Helicopters have dropped thousands of gallons of water on the outskirts of the Chilean port city of Valparaiso to try to extinguish a fire that's destroyed more than 200 homes. Dozens of people living in the hills there left sifting through the ruins of their homes after strong winds spread the blaze through their neighbourhoods. More than 1,000 people left homeless right in the middle of the Christmas celebrations there. The authorities saying they believe arson caused the fire in the first place. And thousands of Algerians have paid tribute to the country's army chief, who as a young man fought for independence from France and then this year became the country's de facto leader. Ahmed Gaid Salah dying suddenly of a heart attack on Monday, having guided the country through the resignation of President Abdelaziz Bouteflika earlier this year to new elections earlier this month. Street protests, though, against the continuation of the political elite in Algeria still ongoing. Now, 15 years ago to the day was one of the deadliest natural disasters in recorded history. The Boxing Day tsunami killed more than 220,000 people across a string of Indian Ocean countries and struck even as far away as Somalia. Peter O'Brien takes us to the Indonesian city of Banda Aceh, which had the highest number of casualties.
In healing waters, Dery Setiawan conquers the waves and his trauma.
We no longer feel like these waves were the ones that destroyed us. In fact, the waves are now our friends.
Many of his family and friends were killed when the Boxing Day tsunami struck. 7,000 people lived in his hometown near Banda Aceh. Only 300 survived. The whole region has been extensively rebuilt and the population has gradually recovered, but scars remain in the architecture and in the mind.
I'm still praying and hoping for the best for my family. If it's true that they're dead, let's hope they're now in heaven.
I won't leave this village. People ask me why, but for me, moving away from the sea would be even more painful.
When the third largest earthquake ever recorded struck off the coast of Sumatra on the 26th of December 2004, the planet vibrated by as much as a centimetre, and the resulting tsunami reached as far as South Africa. In the worst struck places, some of the tidal waves were up to 30 metres high. More than 220,000 people in 14 countries were killed, and countless more went missing.
Now, the Bible is being rewritten. This is in China, where the administration of Xi Jinping is seeking to actually change the religious script, aimed at aligning the text with the variation of the party to reflect core socialist values. Paragraphs deemed wrong by the censors, well, they're set then to be amended or retranslated. Let's have this report.
Could there soon be two different Bibles? One validated for Catholics around the world by the Pope, another quite different one for the people of China, reviewed, approved and corrected by Xi Jinping. China's #1 revealed in November his intention to strengthen control over the texts of all religions. 10 million Chinese currently practice Catholicism across the country, but the Communist Party appoints the priests of the official church. The sermon is checked beforehand to contain no political references. A culture under surveillance. But according to a Vatican specialist, even this form of control may not be enough.
The main principle of the Church is contained in the goodwill of the Ten Commandments. The premise, "you will not kill," is considered in China by the Communist Party as a criticism of the death penalty.
In Rome, Chinese tourists arrive by the tens of thousands every day. Most of them aren't Christian. In their eyes, a recreated Bible comes as no shock.
I don't think we can fully understand what the Bible means. Why? I mean, because the country and the tradition are totally different. We can't get what it means in the Western country.
Pope Francis has accepted the diversity of the Church, praising American Indians for perfectly adapting their dogma to their culture. He said the same of Japanese at the end of November. But a distorted version of the Bible is something he won't be able to accept. Negotiations with China are likely to drag on.
Well, finally in this news, people across Asia have been witnessing an annual solar eclipse, also known as a ring of fire. Crowds gathering to watch the natural phenomenon in a number of countries, including Sri Lanka, Indonesia, India and Saudi Arabia. The moon actually covering the centre of the sun there, giving the appearance of that bright ring. Usually there are 2 solar eclipses on Earth every year, and they occur only when the Earth is completely or partially in the moon's shadow. Some beautiful images, of course, so we'll leave you with them. More news here on France 24 in 15 minutes' time.